Today I'm talking with Eric Kozlowsky. Is that the correct pronunciation of the difficultly spelled last name? We let's start right away with just kind of when you were coming into the field, and that is you had 3 internships listed. 4 months at Cinematics, 4 at Professor Fogg's workshop, and 6 at A Rush Entertainment. Tell me a little bit about interning at those places and what that kind of meant for a person just getting into the field.
So like I started college in fall of 2000. The cinematic internship is funny because they came by the school and they were interviewing students for the internship, and I had like no experience period, even in, because I was like a first semester student. So I interviewed anyway, just out of pure passion, I guess. And director said, like that he was so impressed with my enthusiasm and passion for games that he decided to bring me on as an intern. So that was actually, it was interesting because I didn't actually do art during that internship. It was a level design. And I worked on a canceled PS2 title called Renegade Zero, which was very much like a top-down arcade shooter, I guess, in the vein of like Smash TV. And that was really cool. But did my 4 months of that internship. All of these internships weren't paid, unfortunately. But I canceled, and unfortunately Cinematics went out of business, as game studios tend to do. But having learned from that internship, and then I realized that like, wow, I'm like woefully unprepared for the games and know how to use a 3D software program at that point. So I think Professor Fogg came about I want to say my 3rd year in school. It was a 3-year program. It was a bachelor's degree, but we went year round. We did it in 3 years instead of in 4. But Professor Fogg's workshop was a really great experience. I mean, this was a small studio that was like in a really small office. I actually interned with Brian Stefanelli, who is now the CEO of Airship Syndicate, and they're working on a game that was kickstarted called Battle Chasers Night War. So that was a kind of
that's a 6 degrees of separation issue right there.
Really small.
Wow.
So don't burn any bridges. But that was really great because I actually got to do a lot of artwork on this project. It was a small budget PC game called Steel Tide about submarines in kind of like a World War II setting. And that was great because basically what they had me doing was a lot of, I guess it was cleanup art, but it was more the opposite. It was damage art. So like when you would attack a building, it would explode. And then from normal clean textures to dirty, burnt exploded textures, and the model would be all janked up and there would be like rebar. So I did a bunch of models that was like messed up textures and messed up models. So that was like my first real hands-on experience with working in game, and actually having that's my first game credit is on that. And then my last semester in college, I was just get as much experience as I could. So when A Rush came around, I in their no art for them, and I worked on Playboy the Mansion, which was like a Sims kind of
I
style
remember
game.
that game.
So I tested that, and funny story. The art director at Rush sent me and my friend, my good Phil Gonzalez, who's he's now lead at Blizzard, working on Heroes of the Storm. So he sent the two of us to, I guess it was a Craigslist ad, to buy a bunch of old Playboy issues from some guy, and it was like the sketchiest thing in the world. But it was just like we went to this house and it was all darkly lit, and it felt like we were doing or something like that. It was like super weird, but
Well, I mean, I could just see him thinking like, well, I mean, if they get kidnapped, we'll just get new interns, right?
right. Right. But yeah, so that was like my college experience of just I knew that, like, with the way that the scariest thing that they told me in college was that, oh, like, most likely you'll have to spend the next 6 months looking for a job and like working on your portfolio. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I was like, I want to get out and get right into the industry. So, you know, of studios saying they want someone with experience, but you don't have experience. So like, how do so I was like, well, I guess the best way is to unpaid internship. That was my plan. And it seems like it worked out because I got a job in the industry. I got actually hired before I'd even I convinced them to let me finish graduating before I started. So
okay, well, that actually leads into the next one. Your first job proper was at a studio called Vicious Cycle Incorporated. Is that correct?
yeah,
From 2003 to 2004. And
yeah.
Kind of an interesting tidbit is that during the time that you were there, development was, I guess, happening for Robotech Invasion and maybe Spy versus Spy.
Yeah.
Did you work on either of those?
So I came on to do Robotech, and Robotech was the flagship title for the studio, and like a smaller budget. Spy vs. Spy. So we worked on Robotech, and I did a God, man. Word to the wise to people: don't put things on your how to do them if you don't want to do them in your job, because I knew how to rig characters for animation. It was a sculpt myself just so I could pose my character models in my portfolio. So they knew that I knew how to do that, and so they assigned me for like one straight of just like rigging all of the characters and doing facial morph target expressions. And for those that don't know, back in the day, with the Poly PS2, morph targets would be you would pose the face in like a smile or a AEIO mouth expression, and then it would kind of morph between those shapes to make the character look like they're talking. So I had to set that up on these all of the player characters, and it was the most boring assignment in the world. But so I took that portfolio off my resume now, just in case, even though it's gotten so much more complex than that to do characters in games these days. I mean, the facial capture anyway. But so then I got to do some a little bit of character modeling. I modeled based off another mesh that the lead artist Bert had made. So kind of just like taking his model and then kind of adding on modeled some environments, and then that shipped. And Spy vs. Spy had put on hold because of contract budget things. So it was, even though it was being developed concurrently, there was like a really game didn't really get developed at all, and I got put on that. Actually, you know what? Hold on. Let me. I got moved on to Spy. That's right. I got moved on to Spy vs. Spy during development of Robotech, and then we had to stop development for budget reasons, and I got moved back onto Robotech. So that's what happened there. And Spy vs. Spy was actually way more of an enjoyable project. Like a ton of environments for that, like 3 or 4, and then do some like side things of like weapons screen, because the menu takes place in the spy's hideout. So that was great. That was like for me a really enjoyable experience.
So what you got to do on Spy versus Spy played more to what you like to do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. First and foremost, I'll always be a modeler. I was assigned a texture artist, 2 texture artists, a good friend of mine, Rudy Diaz, and then another friend of mine. Rudy was a college friend who had also gotten hired at Vicious Cycle, and then Donovan Valdez I met at, and he's an incredible artist, and he did all the textures for Spy vs. Spy, and yeah, so like I would just model the environment, and it was super fun. Like that was a blast.
So after you finished up at Vicious Cycle, which was, I believe, something around 14 months, you went on to Z-Axis, where the only title that I could see that was happening at that moment was X-Men: The Official Game. Is that right?
Yeah, it was based on the third and worst X-Men movie. Well, kind of based. It was supposed to bridge X-Men 2 to X-Men 3: The Last Stand, and that was a horrible experience for me. I mean, it was some of my closest friends that I'm still friends with to this day. Like super talented artists. Ben Schaefer is now at Epic, kicking ass. And then Paul Sullivan, who the dude is in my opinion, he was the art director on the Book of Life. So that alone, like meeting such amazing talent at this highlight and just being in awe of what they do. But in terms of like what I was doing, it just wasn't. I don't know. For whatever reason, it was a really dark period of my life. Not to get too heavy, but like my father had recently passed away. I'd gone through like a really bad breakup, and so like I just wasn't in the right place. So I was at Z-Axis for 6 months, and I just decided that I was just done with the game industry at that point. So I put in a notice and moved back to New York. And I don't know what I was planning. I think I was going to try to live some sort of bohemian lifestyle in New York and just do art.
Just live in Soho and I'm just going to make art, man.
Yeah, no, that was the plan. My brother and I, we went to Prague for like a week or two, and then we back to the States and picked up all my stuff in San Francisco and drove cross country for a week. So that was really amazing. Like it recovery period for me to just kind of like reevaluate life, and kind of figure out what I wanted to do next. I called it my quarter life crisis. It's about 25 at that point. And then so during that time I took some classes at the in the School of Visual Arts in New York City, some storytelling classes, some children's book writing classes, figure art class, figure out like what the next step was. And then at some point I was like, you know what, I think I just need to find the right studio, find like a fit for me that works. And I decided to give games another chance. And I got hired back in San Francisco at a studio called Planet Moon Studios. And
talk about finding the right fit. You ended up having that be nearly a 4-year gig.
That was like, quite a long stint. And I worked on a lot of really good projects there that I'm really proud of. They weren't well-received games, but it was some of my favorite jobs I've ever had.
Yeah, because I was just kind of looking down the list of things that were there, and there really aren't many titles that speak to a level of high notoriety. I think the only one that I even really truly recognized was the Drawn to Life sequel.
Yeah. Yeah. And PSP, that because I came on to work on Conan, and that's what they hired me for. It was going to come out concurrently with the Xbox title, but it was canceled like a month into my tenure at Planet Moon. Um, so they, and that was really a fun project because Afterburner being a legacy title, any kid of the '80s knows Afterburner. I mean, hell, it was in Terminator 2 when the
Yeah.
T-1000 finds John Connor in the arcade. So that was a lot of fun, and that it got really good reviews on the PSP, like 7s and 8s. Um, but yeah, I mean, yeah, this, being a third party publisher, excuse me, third party developer, a lot of times it was a matter of funding projects that would pay the go.
Yeah,
Battle.
that is one of the things that I kind of hear as a recurring theme of kind of the smaller studios that sometimes it almost becomes a force of habit where you kind of the only parallel I have is maybe in acting, where when you're an actor of a certain level of notoriety, you don't really have the luxury of turning down roles.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so the studios kind of work a similar way. It's like, what's going to keep the lights on?
Right. And the thing is, it's like this is 2000, 2006 to 2007. This is prior to the indie game revolution. This, you know digital download. PSN hadn't taken off yet. Xbox Live hadn't really taken off. The iOS, iTunes Store, iPhone wasn't even out at this. I mean, it was out, but
it wasn't that yet. Yeah. So you're the beginning of your time at Planet Moon was really the twilight of the physical game era.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was a period, and this was a period where a lot of smaller studios were erased off the map. It was the end of the mid-tier title. Because like now you have a lot of indie games, and you have a lot of big budget AAA, and those little like middle the road games don't really exist anymore. And so this was the twilight of that period where you would get games like Dark Sector, which was like not a great game, but not a terrible game. So that was this kind of period there where those games were kind of like it was growing and trying to adjust to HD game development, and it unfortunately it killed off a lot of studios. Being one of them, unfortunately, is no longer in existence. But the thing is, Battle of the Bands is a game that was pretty universally panned and sold terribly. But I had working on that game. I got to do concept art, and I'm no concept artist, let me tell you. But being a small studio, you wear a lot of hats. So got to do concept art, character modeling, environment modeling. I put a ton of artwork into that game, and a lot of fun. It was a really weird, quirky game. And that was probably my favorite project. And funnily enough, after I finished Battle of the Bands, Planet Moon, we were kind of for the next project, but they didn't really have anything for me to do. And the owners of Planet Moon Studios were really good friends with Tim Schafer at Double Fine. And Double Fine was trying to get to alpha on Brutal Legend.
I was just about to ask you about that, because right in the middle of your time at Planet Moon, you fit in some contract work for Double Fine in 2008.
Yeah.
And pretty much that's right where Brutal Legend was being made. So you were kind of working at the very beginning of that project?
No, that was pretty storied development cycle. So I went over to Double Fine pretty much as a loan from. I was still being paid my salary from Planet Moon, but for all intents and purposes, I was the employee of Double Fine. I had keys to the office for 6 months straight. I walked in the offices of Double Fine and didn't step foot in Planet Moon. And so the goal was when I came to work on Brutal Legend, it was still being published by Sierra, or I guess Activision, and then the whole drama with Activision and Double Fine going over to EA, that kind of happened while I was there. So the plan was to reach alpha. That's why I was brought on, to kind of help for that final push of content creation. But they kind of got new life when they signed with EA, so that went for another year, I think. So yeah, so initially they wanted me for 3 months to help with alpha. They worked so much they kept me for 6. I think they even said that, hey, we would like to hire you full time, but that would be kind of a dick move to do to Planet Moon. We're borrowing you. So that was a really great experience, because that was my first experience working at the time, next gen title, doing HD development. And yeah, I really enjoyed quite a bit. And that's a really, I know it's a kind of a mixed bag for a lot of people. They didn't like the RTS on. I thought the game turned out great. I really enjoyed it.
I remember enjoying it more than people said I should have.
Yeah, exactly. I think it got unfairly criticized by.
I actually didn't know anything about what people said it was supposed to be. Like, I didn't think, oh, this is supposed to be a third-person action title, and so the RTS threw me off. I literally knew nothing other than what it looked like. And so when I played it, it didn't throw me. I was like, oh, it's this kind of game. Like, it didn't surprise me that much.
Yeah, and I think expectations for that title, what it was, is I think people went into it thinking like they're going to get a God of War kind of like beat 'em up style like action title, and then all of a sudden it's like, what the hell is this? And so I think that threw a lot of people for a loop when that was revealed. But yeah, I mean the soundtrack in that game is legendary. Although
that was actually something that I really liked about it. I mean, I know, voice work is a bit of a shit show when it comes to the quality from project to project, and so I actually liked the sound of that game so much. I thought the acting was well done. I thought that the soundtrack that was curated was great, and I thought the sound effects, it made me feel like I was experiencing it. Was it's weird. It's like I don't even really remember how the game plays, to be frank. I know it was an RTS and you controlled him in the sky at times, but mostly I just remember thinking like, this is a fun experience.
Yeah,
I like watching it. I like hearing it. I like doing all the stuff.
Yeah, and for me, I was a metalhead in high school, and so like for me, it spoke to me in terms of just the genre of music. Although I'm super upset with Tim for not putting Typo Negative, because Typo Negative is my favorite band, and it would have been a perfect fit, the gothic element in that game, and there was no Typo Negative. So that's my sore spot with Brutal Legend. But I digress.
Right.
But yeah, so that game was, I think like to really test my skills on a larger production, because prior to Brutal Legend, a lot of the games I had were smaller budget titles, and yeah, and then after that 6 months, I went back to Planet Moon and started to Life, which yeah, that game, that was a tough title, and I think that was just like a situation of just a short development cycle, and I don't know. I think part of it was just Planet Moon. I had never done a side scroller game before, and then there was the drawing element, all this other kind of extra stuff. But for whatever reason, that title, I don't know, like it did some things really well. You could actually draw in real time and have like physics-based items interact with the world. So like the technology behind it was like really good. But I think I think people enjoy the DS versions more favorably with that. And I
I
think
think there just was something intrinsically more natural feeling about having the stylus and in the way that you were supposed to do it.
yeah, I think
Like,
drawing with
I
the
actually remember a friend of mine saying like he got the Wii version of Drawn to Life specifically because he liked it, but he found it to be like something wasn't working. Like, I think I don't know. I think it's like just a game that works so specifically well on a stylus-based system
yeah,
that it was hard to make that transition.
drawing with the Wii remote was not intuitive at all. And I think, this was the end of the gold rush on the Wii, where, Wii games developed by Nintendo were selling like crazy. But I think publishers realized that third party titles were not selling as well. And THQ, this was the beginning of the end for THQ. They were starting to uh, publish a lot of titles that didn't really do that well. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm proud of the work I did. I think the work that we put into it was exceptional, but yeah, not having the time to really put the polish in just kind of hurt that project quite a bit.
Now that we've kind of covered what would one say the kind of foundation of your career, the early parts of it, let's actually back things up a little bit chronologically and go way back. Where did you first ply your trade as a child? Were you a childhood drawer, an artist, or did you actually kind of come into that later?
Yeah, I was. The earliest memory I have of drawing was in second grade. But it's funny because it was something that like I had a propensity for and kind of took it for granted. When I see people who truly have like really worked hard at developing their skill. I think there is something to be said for raw natural talent, but I do think that it also requires a lot of hard work and uh, skill. So I kind of, always had a knack for the arts. Kind of came easier to me than other. I never really took it seriously. I was never. I mean, I had friends who would just draw every single day, and for me, I would rather play video games. Um, but it was the one thing that I knew that I was good at, and I knew that I wanted to do something in the arts. And I grew up. I was born 1980, so I grew up at the beginning of the rebirth of games. With my first system was a hand-me-down Atari 2600. And then the Nintendo Entertainment System came out in '85. I got that as a birthday present, and that like just kind of changed my life. I was addicted. I call it from then on out. But it's funny because it was such a mysterious medium that nobody knew to make it. I remember talking to my cousin. I was like, "Yeah, I want to make games," and he's like, "Oh, you got to be good at math, and games are only made in Japan anyway, so you have to learn Japanese, move to Japan, and be good at math. Three things that were never going to happen because I'm terrible at math."
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. I do kind of remember similar conversations about like where games come from. It was like Japan was just a place where games came from.
Yeah, it was like
if you wanted to make games, you had to be there.
Yeah, and it was like a mysterious thing. Like I remember like a friend telling me, like, "Oh, they have like 10 Super Mario. We only have like two of them."
I remember that exact thing. They'd be like, "No, they got way more Super Mario games than us."
Right, and that rumor probably came about because of the those two never came out in America. So, it was like, it was based on a nugget of truth that they did have one other Super Mario that we never got, and then it got blown up to 10.
Right.
So yeah, typical schoolyard wise, just like being able to fight Kano too.
Right.
But yeah, so it's funny because I remember the moment where it was always like a passive dream of like, oh, I want to make games someday, but it never became like a goal of mine until I played Fantasy Tactics. So that was like way later. I was in high school at this point. I think that was 95, 96, maybe, if I remember correctly, when watching.
Yeah, Tactics was before 7 because it had the 7 demo on it.
Oh, really? Okay. I know Cloud was in Tactics.
What was it? What had the Final Fantasy 7 demo?
The 7 demo came with Tobo number 1.
That's it.
Yeah,
getting all my Square mixed up.
Yeah, I like maybe like 6 months after 7, or maybe a little bit after 7, because you could unlock Cloud.
You're right. Cloud was in it. Yeah.
But so yeah, I booted up Tactics, and the opening cinematic intro where the characters are running on the chocobos. I had like an epiphany where I was like, if I can't make games, maybe I can learn computer animation, and that'll be my way to be a part of the game process. I'll work on the intro, because there's no math required in that, because it's just a movie. Where I was like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. I want to work on games somehow, but since I don't know, and I was naive, I didn't know anything about 3D modeling, games are made. So that was like the moment where I was like, all right, this is the goal now.
You saw your opening,
and it didn't work out like that. I graduated high school in 1998, and I immediately went to a computer animation program in Philadelphia, and that I just was not prepared. I think level was not ready to. I was not ready to leave home, and I immediately dropped out and moved back to New York, and spent the next 2 years just it was a terribly unproductive 2 years of just hanging out and smoking pot and just drinking, and not really just doing anything productive. And I remember 19, I was about to turn 20, and I was just like, man, something's got to give. I was like, I need to figure out this can't go on forever. And I just kind of like, at that time, I was like, all right, I'm gonna give it another go. Really try to get into the game industry, and this was the beginning of game art programs. So like in student of Phoenix was one of like 3 schools in the country, and back then the Art Institute had than they do today. So back in 2000, they had just started a game art program like catered to making video games. That's the only reason why I went to school in Phoenix, because otherwise I would never have gone to school in Phoenix. But they were the only school that did it. And I had heard of DigiPen, but DigiPen was only about programming for games. That's not the case at all. One of my best friends at Retro DigiPen, and he's a badass. But anyway, so I knew that I was like, all right, I'm going to leave home. I need interactions of friends and family, and just general history that I have with New York. And I went to school, and it was great. Changed my life for sure. I mean, a lot of people, it's a for-profit school, so I think they art institutes pretty shady things with getting students and getting money, but my experience got me a job, so I can only speak to my experience. So it was
Yeah. Interesting. So, it's funny you kind of mentioned that very typical late teenage holding pattern that young men often go through.
Right.
That I remember having a bit of a similar time from 18 to 20, where I got out of school, I went to college, dropped out of college, and then just didn't do anything productive for the next few years until I was 20. I was like, so I've got to do something. And I wish now I had thought your thought and went back to school, because I joined the military and man, that was not fun at all. So yeah, it's interesting that you basically just kind of had that normal malaise that comes with the transition to adulthood, and you kind of you doubled down on what you wanted to do originally instead of changing it up.
Well, it's funny because you mentioned military, because at that point I remember, if this doesn't work out in Phoenix, I'm going to join the army.
It is it's a last resort, isn't it?
Yeah,
Man, if I can't do anything, I'm going to punch out and just go to basic training.
I mean, this was prior to 9/11, so I mean, I would have been in Afghanistan for sure. So my life would have taken on a whole. Um, but yeah, I because within those 2 years between high school and going to Phoenix, I had gone to community college. I had tried going to State University of New York. I had dropped out. Yeah, it was it was like you said, a very
Okay. So now that you're kind of in it, and just talk about general, like your entire life, at what times, how did your family how does your family view what you do and what you did do? Like, because you were an artist and a big gamer, and
I mean, I'll say
did you
that,
have the kind of dad who was like, can't believe this effing kid has played more video games? Or was it more like you knew you wanted to play video games and they kind of
well,
could see something in it?
the crazy thing is, and I don't want to go too dark but my dad was, when I was 8 years old, he was in a accident, and he suffered severe brain damage. So he was in and out of hospital from when I was 8 up until when I was, I think, 12 or 13, and then he came home, and we had to take. Like I said, he passed away in 2004. So he wasn't really in the picture. But my mom, obviously, she raised me and my four. And so she's
So say that again. You're for what?
She's a literal saint in my eyes.
Say it again. You broke up when you said you're four.
Four
You're four
brothers.
siblings, 4 brothers. Okay, so it was all brothers. It was 5 boys.
Yeah. So she raised
Wow.
all of us on her own. And so, like I said, she's a literal saint in my eyes. And she was really supportive. She was, she went back to school, and now she degrees, and she's like super educated, but she went back to school in her 40s. So she was a big proponent of education, and her thing was that go to college. That was her mandate. But she didn't care really what we pursued. Throughout high school, she would have to take away my games, if my grades got bad, and so she was always battling that. But she never put pressure on me to do anything that like, oh, you got to get a real job, become a lawyer, or or something like that. But she's immensely proud of what I do. I mean, whenever I go back to visit New York, she still she teaches from. So she schedules like career days where I'll go in and I'll speak to students in the technology classes, or the careers in the game industry. So she couldn't be prouder of what I do, and that means the world to me. She will talk about what I do. So yeah.
So I mean, man, five sons that's quite a gig. My head's spinning thinking about thinking raising 5 boys, and like with my wife, and just to say that she's taking care of 5 kids and a husband who's injured. I mean, yeah, and then on top of all that, to still be so supportive, I can see why she is you hold her in such high regard.
Yeah. It's probably the hardest thing about my career is that video games being so based on the West Coast, very far away from family, and that's probably the most difficult part of my job. I would say is just that I'm incredibly close with my brothers. We're varying age differences, but all four of them are my best friends, and so being away from them is really difficult, especially now that they have kids. An uncle, and
Are you the odd man out geographically? Are most of them still there?
oh, all of them are still in New York. I'm the only one who left the state. So
wow. So I mean, you do get the sense sometimes that you're missing out on that extended family experience and seeing all the nephews a lot and what have you.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like I couldn't make it home for Christmas this year, so I had to Skype with them and watch them all, open up the presents that I sent them through the mail, and that. But it's something that you have to kind of, balance in life and figure out, what works. Yeah, that is definitely probably the hardest thing about games. Is just for whatever reason they never took a foothold in New York. Maybe cost of living, but.
I was gonna say I don't see how it would be so much worse there than LA.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know, but it is what it is, and my passion. It's it's what I love to do. So you just have to make that sacrifice sometimes.
Okay. So we talked about you as a younger man. We talked about you as a slightly less younger man later on. Now let's talk about you as you're in the industry and you're doing big things at big studios. The first of which I think a lot of people would probably say is one of your most significant contributions to a big game was that you worked as, I believe, an artist on Uncharted 3 at Naughty Dog.
Yeah. As for whatever reason, I had this thing in my mind where I call it imposter syndrome, I guess, but I had to prove that I was capable of standing shoulder to shoulder with, and that I could prove to myself that I was capable of getting a job at a studio that is as legendary as Naughty Dog.
Right. It's just a side note to anybody listening. That sentiment he just expressed, the little bit of an imposter syndrome, is quite possibly the most commonly expressed sentiment I have ever heard from game developers. That they feel like somebody is going to find them out one day, like, oh no, he doesn't know anything. And so it's so funny how many people who I regard as quite talented and really good at what they do, and then they'll still say something like, yeah, sometimes I get the feeling like I just don't know what I'm doing.
Well, yeah, I mean,
it's such a weird thing to hear people say that, and they're working on what are really the pinnacles of gaming.
Well, it's I feel like I go online, I go to websites like ArtStation or Polycount, and I'm looking through galleries of other artists, and there's mind-bogglingly good, and some of it's from guys and girls still in school, and it's like, holy crap, like they're in school. Amazingly gifted. So it's always that artist thing where you kind of are your own worst critic. But for me, like getting a job at Naughty Dog was like, oh yeah, you've made it. And it's funny how
so you were there for 9 months, right?
Yeah, I was there for 9 months. And the reason why I left actually was I had gotten an offer from Square Enix, which was, and they had a small studio that was going to do game development, because the Square LA offices for a very long time has been just testing HR, and they had an opening it for a lead, and I was then at this point, and was like, well, I want to start transitioning my career into more of management, and kind of onto a team that I could help along with the project. And it was an original IP. It seemed really cool, and it was a significant pay raise, so there was that.
I was gonna say, when you throw a lead on the beginning of things, it often comes with that.
So it was a difficult decision because Naughty Dog obviously was a a massive honor to be, but and I'm probably going to contradict myself, but because it was on, but at that time being on such a massive production as Uncharted, I felt a little in terms of my contributions to the project. And I wanted to have more of a creative force in what I was doing. And I felt like that I had that opportunity at Square team. It was like 10 people, maybe at most 15 with a lot of contractors, which echoes Lab Zero to it. So I went over there, and it was very
So
short-lived. It was like
just so we can talk about Square Enix and when you were as a lead for just a second. But just what did you actually work on when you were on Uncharted 3?
So
because I think more than anything, Uncharted is kind of a game that in a lot of ways, it's a game about the people who make the environments. It's kind of always been about, you looking over a cliff and be like,
Right.
damn, did they modeled all that? Like,
Yeah.
and so how much of that was you?
Well, man, the team at Naughty Dog is pretty big, and it's only left. But so I got to work on. Let's see. So the first thing they had me doing was what they would call wide. And so anytime, like you mentioned, you come over a cliff and you see like this massive expanse. So I was working on the Yemen, and they basically were like, okay, well, we need like a vista. And so when you're like running around the Yemen rooftops and you see all the buildings in the background, we need those mountains. And so that's what I initially was working on. And again, I was working with really talented texture artists responsible for modeling and laying out the buildings to make for an interesting composition. And so after that, work on the trailer for the announcement of the game, which was an interesting experience. It was more of like working on a movie because they'd give me the camera shots of like, okay, and Drake walks across the sand dunes here, and then there's going to be a gun stuck in the sand. So for 3 months straight, I just worked on sand dunes, and
wow.
Yeah, and I don't think it was a difficult because I would model it to the best of my ability, and then they would look at it, but no, it doesn't quite look enough like a real sand dune and a physical photocopier because they just wanted it to look as real as they could. And I was just like, man, it's kind of a bummer, but I'll try my best. I think I nailed it on some shots, but other shots, I think after the fact, they went in and kind of improved on my work. But yeah, so I worked for a while, and then I worked on. There's a level in Uncharted 3 where Drake comes out. He stumbles across like what he believes to be an abandoned like village in the middle of the desert.
Yeah.
So I worked on that. And kind of did some initial modeling and layout, and then also had to work with some outsourcers to manage the outsourcing. And and then it was around that time when I had left to go to Square. So a few contributions, not where I can play the game and see my contributions in there and still feel proud of it. I'm immensely proud of the work I did on that game.
But it's not the kind of thing that jumps out at you.
Yeah, I'm still a little burned that they didn't put my name in the credits.
Really? They did not put your name in the credits at all?
No. I any malicious intent in there. I just think that project is so huge and there's so many moving parts, and between the outsourcing studios in China and all the employee Naughty Dog, I think I probably just got lost in the shuffle, but it still burns a little bit.
Of course. As an aside, is there a chance you can tell me a little bit about the distant lands modeling concept? Because that's actually something that is, I don't know. I've talked to other people, and some people feel the same. There's like whenever I see like a modeled environment or really anything, and it kind of hits an uncanny valley where it reminds you of something, it's real because you're looking at it, but then it's not quite real, and it gives you like a deep sense of unease.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's like anytime you peer behind the polygons and you see the great void of, you know, the infinite behind any
Right.
model, you get
Right.
this weird feeling. And I remember playing older games like N64 and PlayStation 1 era games where the ability to break out of the environment was sort of a more prevalent thing. Like games, I don't know, maybe things were sloppier or they hadn't learned how to lock people into the pre-planned environments. And so you'd get out of them and you'd start to be on the outside of these environments where the textures start to get lower and the polygon density gets lower. And all of a sudden you're like in a town square that is modeled to the absolute lowest possible standard because it was supposed to be 300 meters away.
Right.
But you're standing in it and it looks real but not real, and it's just weird. I mean, you were right in that. You had to model that far away place closely. Do you know what I'm talking about, or is it
No,
or by you touching it so often, do you just not?
well,
It doesn't even matter.
It's kind of like a sleight of. The best way I can describe it is a friend of mine at Naughty Dog, who had worked on some of the similar stuff on Uncharted 2. He described it as like is viewing the high res stuff all throughout the game. You know, so he worked on the war zone in Nepal on Uncharted 2, and he's like, fully rendered out buildings with gutters and pipes and broken windows, and the player, when they see the low poly stuff in the distance, their mind kind of fills the gap, and so they assume that what they're looking at in the distance is of the same detail as what they're seeing as they run around. But the fact that it's not as detailed is only because it's far away and their eyes can't make it out. So it's kind of like a little like fakery. And if you do it well enough, then, of course, if you stare at it, you're like, oh, it's just a box with a couple of things on it and a texture assigned to it. But the way the illusion works in the case of Uncharted is that it's looks exactly like the stuff you're running around in, but just at a lower quality level. So there's visual identifiers that you can kind of associate, like, oh yeah, that's the same awning and that's the same window, and so you start to connect the dots a little bit, and that's the way it's meant to work. But yeah, if you break through the collision somehow and all of a sudden are standing in the middle of this 200 polygon building, it's going to break the illusion. So
yeah, I just because I'm breaking out of places has been it's a gaming tradition at this point, but it's kind of weird when you work on that, when you're not even, you are supposed to be there, you are supposed to be in the place most other people never get to see, and so how you view it is substantially different than the a gamer. It's it's weird, like people even give kind of weird names to things that are never supposed to be something you see. Like you get out of the map and say Halo 1, and like I think getting out of the map in Halo was always easier. It was like it was almost part of the game at a certain point. But there was like this weird tree next to a soldier that like some Bungie employee had left in, so he would like say nonsensical things. And again, 1% of the people will ever see that from the just wanting to break out of the environment. But somebody had to have put something there and then just left it. Do you have anything like that at all?
Oh, sure. I mean, I've done that in games. Like I was saying in Battle of the Bands, I put my cat in the background in one of the levels. Not really in Uncharted. I think I was probably too afraid to.
Right. It was a little too high stakes to be throwing in cat pictures.
I did do a lot of that. Jumping ahead a little bit, but I did put a lot of Easter eggs in Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze.
Okay, so you mentioned that you moved on to be a lead at Square Enix, not for very long, but what were you working on? Because the thing is, it's easy to identify a Square game, pre-Square Enix, but after Square Enix became quite a large publisher, I think people forget how many games Square Enix makes. And so I have no idea what you're working on. There's no, like in that year, in that 6 months you were there was like a dozen games being worked on across the board.
The game I was working on never got released. It got canceled.
You can't talk about
it? It was a game that was going to be on Xbox 360 and PSN, codenamed Project Dropship. And the website Silicon Era, somebody, I swear it wasn't me, but somebody released a ton of videos and screenshots. So if listeners can go dig that up on the internet, the game is called Project Dropship, and it was pretty. I think we were only about like 7-8 months out from shipping, and unfortunately, I think it was. Square had a lot of really poor releases back to back. Final Fantasy 14 being the big one. When that first, people remember that the game was just not in a good state, and then they released this really bad game called Mind Jack, which was poor received, and then Kane Lynch 2. So it was just like, I think at that point Square was just like, you know what, we're going to double down on Final Fantasy 14. Not going to release anything that we perceive as being damaging to the Square Enix brand, because we've done enough of that. And so they canceled the project, and this experiment of developing games in the United States was, not going to happen. I think that was also around the time when they had purchased Eidos. I think they felt they already had enough Western developers at that point, because they had Crystal Dynamics now, and they had Eidos Montreal. Studio in Los Angeles was just unnecessary, because they already had.
They felt they had what they need and were willing to eat the cost of that game, basically.
And it was unfortunate, because I really think that the game was turning out to be pretty special.
What was it? I mean, Project Dropship kind of gives some allusion as to what it might have been.
I mean, I don't know how much I could say.
Well, if you're running into possible NDA stuff, then let's not worry about it. So people can watch the videos if they like Project Dropship.
Project Dropship on Silicon Era.
Yep. Okay, so Square Enix, although that did not work out, did lead into something that did work out for you pretty clearly, as you spent over 4 years at Retro Studios working on some very highly rated games for Nintendo, being, I believe, Donkey Kong Country Returns and Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze.
Yeah, and that was that was a blast. I really enjoyed that a lot. It's fun. Retro was the first time I've ever joined a studio where I didn't know what I was working on prior to starting. Nintendo's level of scary, and even though I was hired by them, they still wouldn't let me know what I was working on until my first day. So I was the one of the first artists to start on Tropical Freeze. I joined the studio, and all the other artists were still on Mario Kart 7 on the 3DS. So it was really awesome to be on the ground floor of this. And Donkey Kong Country, I remember being blown away by the original on the Super 3D. Nintendo. Yeah. The VHS tape from Nintendo Power, and
you too. That was so awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome. I loved it.
Did you do the thing at like the fairs where they had like the time-based? It was like a cart that only had one level. You had to get through as quickly as possible, and if you won it for the day, you got like a leather Donkey Kong jacket.
Yeah. So I don't know if it was the same thing, but it had a competition where you had to get the most amount of bananas.
Yeah, the bananas. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny is I did that as an extra mode in Tropical Freeze, to do that same thing of like playing through the levels with a time limit to get the most amount. We just didn't have the time to implement it.
That would have been really funny. I remember I won a pair of glasses because I won like that heat.
Oh, nice.
But then of course I didn't win the day, so like I didn't get the jacket. But I did get some cool DKC glasses. I was the coolest 8-year-old at that fair, man. I don't know what happened.
Yeah. that was great. I worked on a ton of content for that game.
I was going to say, the time that you were there pretty much puts you there for the entire development. So you must have put hands on a lot of stuff. Anything concrete that you could name that maybe might jump out at people?
Sure. I mean, the level Windmill Hills. I worked on the environment for the owl boss Scal. I worked on the very last level of the game, the one where you're on Ramby and it's all lava and the entire ice fortress is melting. I developed the water ruins in the underwater world. So yeah, it was quite a bit. The only stuff I didn't really work on was the Savannah level, and that's like the African themed kind of. So I didn't do any artwork in that area, but every other part of the game, I pretty much did some artwork on it.
Interesting. Okay, so I mean, you were. I don't know. I actually haven't talked to very many people who worked at Retro. It's kind of got a bit of a. I think it holds a very similar place in people's hearts for a Nintendo developer, but being it almost kind of parallels Naughty Dog in a way, and I think in the gamers' minds is that it's Naughty Dog's an extremely prolific, high-quality PlayStation developer, and Retro is pretty much the same for Nintendo.
Oh, sure.
What was kind of how did you walk away from this situation? Obviously, you were there for quite a while, so it must have been pretty good.
Yeah, it was a tough decision, one that I sometimes still, think about, like if it was the right choice. I think now that I'm at Lab Zero, I do think it was brave. But I left, without getting into too many specifics, one of the biggest ones was, again, from a creative standpoint, that I would never really be able to really give too much creative input. What we do is heavily influenced by Japan, and I think that's both a huge test Nintendo, and it could be sometimes I think a detriment. But after Tropical Freeze, we worked on. I can't say what we worked on, but it was still ongoing, obviously. But I just felt.
Wikipedia lists it as currently unannounced game.
Yes, currently unannounced game. So I was starting to feel creatively stagnant. I would come up with ideas that I felt really had some really good merit, and would agree with me. And they would fall on deaf ears, and that kind of was upsetting. This is a good idea. Like we should do something like this. And for politics, for whatever reason, it didn't happen. And I think my frustration get the better of me. And I left to go to BioWare. And this is not a knock against BioWare. They're a great studio games, but it was just not the right fit for me. I was incredibly unhappy there. Working on Mass Effect Andromeda.
I was going to say, there's only two things you could have worked on, and one is more likely than the other. So Mass Effect Andromeda was probably it, right?
Yeah, and that I have no doubt in my mind that game is amazing. But working on if I thought working on a Naughty Dog game was a massive undertaking, you're talking about being in Austin, Texas, working with a team in Montreal and a team in Edmonton, and dealing with 3 different time zones and conference calls on a daily basis. You're just given your one little piece that you have to do. And if I thought I had no creative influence at Retro, God, at BioWare.
It's funny because you mentioned it, because that's actually one of the real big takeaways that I think people who don't know anything at all about the industry is that today, when you work on a big game, it's not. It's funny. Like, you can use Lab Zero as a bit of a microcosm of how it works, where there are the people there, and they are the people who decide what the game is, but the people that work on the game are numerous and legion, and you don't even know who they all are if you don't look very, very specifically at the untold number of people who touched something in a game.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a level of pride of the craftsmanship of doing your job well and doing good art, and that is an important aspect of game development. But if you're someone who enjoys the creative process of birthing an idea and then helping to see it come to fruition, I think I get so much out of just creating the assets. And at this stage, again, at this stage of my career, now, I was just looking for something more. I was like, I've put my time in as a purely asset creator. I've been doing this. I've been doing this for 15 years. So, like I was like, man, I'm going to Bioware. I think I was just kind of maybe bedazzled by the prospect of working on a PS4 the glitz and glamour, but I had a major epiphany at Bioware where it wasn't fun anymore making games. It was kind of like how I felt when I was 25, and I was just like, the game, going back to the games I was playing when I was a teenager, young adult, Final Fantasy VI, Secret of Mana, Chrono Tactics, Vagrant Story, Super Metroid, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Oddworld. And I was like, man, those are the inspired me to make video games. And I was like, but that's not what I'm making anymore. Like, I love Mass Effect. Mass Effect 2 and 3 and really enjoyed it, but those weren't, they don't inspire me to like want to create. And it's funny because it's Peter Bartholow, the CEO of Lab Zero. He was a friend of mine.
Where'd you meet Peter?
Acquainted through my really good friend Eva Krasminski. She was a lighting artist at Naughty Dog, and she had worked with Peter at I think it was Iron Studios, I think. And so we just went out to lunch one day. Eva and I had met up with Peter, and then Peter and I just maintained a friend totally just online, just through Facebook and chatting here and there. And I reached out to Peter and was like, hey man, it's Indivisible, but just the trailer, nothing else had really come out of it. Just that, like, hey, this is going to be our next game, and stay tuned. We're gonna be on Indie. Reached out to him and was like, hey, like, what's going on? Like, do you guys have any sort of freelance? I'm and this was actually in me leaving Retro and starting at Bioware. So I had like a 3-week period where I didn't really have anything to do. And I reached out, actually, he's like, he said, we're going to start production on the prototype that we're going to launch with the Indiegogo campaign. And, I'll talk to the art director of Indivisible about, seeing if you're the right fit for doing the environments. And so I did a couple assets for them, had some Skype calls, and they liked my work. And so I did all the models on the prototype. They textured them at Lab Zero, but
all of them.
Yeah, I modeled the entire prototype.
Wow, I did not know that.
Set pieces that kind of are more painterly, that kind of feel more like a Skullgirls kind of background, and those were done by Willie. He was another employee at Lab Zero, and he's just like an amazing concept artist, painter. So he did those. But
I actually think I know the ones you're talking about, because I remember. I can't remember if it was maybe Mike or Earl mentioned that the big shot of the huge tree in the back was.
Yeah,
that was
Willie. And that was Willie, and Willie. So I did all that, and then Peter was like, "Hey man, if we get funded, we did," and he's like, "I'd like to hire you on as a lead environment artist." And at this point, this was now October, because I the prototype in August. And I was miserable. I was miserable at Bioware, and I was like, that sounds like the most incredible thing in the world. Obviously, a big life change because living in Austin, I owned a home. Would mean moving back out to LA. So I had to talk. And as you know, there was some pretty scary moments during the campaign where it didn't look like it was,
Yeah. It was not a sure thing that whole time.
Yeah. And so I was looking at it like, man, I want this to happen really bad, but I don't know. And we all know
Yeah, I
how,
mean, it's funny that a lot of people were thinking like, oh, if this doesn't happen, I won't get a game. But I mean, from your point of view, you were like, this job I really want won't exist if this doesn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, that was everyone at Lab Zero. It was, if Indivisible didn't happen, the future of Lab Zero was definitely
it's pretty much done.
And so I think hopefully a lot of people realize that they weren't just funding a game; they were birthing a. So yeah, so the project got funded. I flew out for a nice little wrap party at a restaurant out here in LA, to celebrate getting funded, and I met with the team, and it was more of it was a personality kind of evaluation of whether or not I would, because a big thing that Peter stressed to me is that anyone who they bring on has personality fit for the team. It's a very small, tight-knit team, and personality goes a long way of being able to work with people. So he wanted to make sure everyone on the team, felt like I was a good fit. I mean, obviously they knew skill-wise that I could do my stuff because I'd worked on the prototype. More to just see like, okay, is this guy an asshole or not? And thankfully I wasn't. So, they gave me the thumbs up, and I came on board in February, and man, I've been espousing on Twitter. This is the happiest I've been working in games, and I can't even remember when. It's just every day is just like this avalanche of just talking with people of like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? And then going back to my and kind of working on the, figuring out how we're going to make the environments look as good as the characters. And so it's like, it's got its challenges, but at the same time, really developing, the game. And I'm there on the ground floor. Like, we brainstorm as a company of like coming up with game ideas that are going to be in the game, and having that sort of like creative input is what I've been craving for years now.
I was going to say, it's funny. I have a question here. Why Lab Zero? What makes you feel good? But the whole time you've been basically laying out your path to why Lab Zero is the right choice for you. You've said, you preferred teams where you could talk to people and share in those creative inputs, and you've wanted to so badly to feel like what an idea that you have can affect the game.
Right.
And it is funny that kind of you say, okay, now I'm with Lab Zero and I talk to people all the time. And if I talk to somebody making a gameplay thing, if I have a good idea, it could be in the game. Or if I talk to somebody in a character or environment or whatever, if I talk to somebody and my idea is just good, it has a real chance of being in the game. You're right. I mean, anytime you do anything artistically, I think believing that your input matters is incredibly important.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Z, yesterday pulled me to his machine. He's like, "Hey, Eric, can you come over here and tell me what you think about this feature?" And he was doing something with Ajna with one of her movesets, and I'm playing. I'm like, "Oh yeah, this feels really good." And if it was a little bit slower, and then we had a discussion about the speed of the frames, and it was just like really cool because it was outside of my discipline. But as a designer, Mike appreciated my input, and one of the best compliments Mike ever gave me, he's like, "You're the right kind of nerd."
I was going to say, so many of the games you listed, obviously it was like, man, all those games you listed are the kind of games I like. I mean, you listed a bunch of Super Nintendo and PlayStation games that I remember being hugely influential. I mean, I still hold Final Fantasy VI as my favorite Final Fantasy to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. incredible. And you know,
But a
like,
lot of those games are also something Mike has said, like, yeah, I remember playing Chrono Trigger, and Chrono Trigger is so awesome, and Super Metroid, and so yeah, when you mention all of that, I was like, man, you must fit in really well with Mike.
well, yeah, I mean, because that's the thing is that you know, the thing I appreciate more than, you know, more than just the fact that, you know, I have creative input, and you know, the style of the game is amazing. I mean, Alex Hod is freaking. But this is the type of game that I grew up wanting to make. You know, this is a, you know, very JRPG style game with Metroidvania elements to it, and it's, you know, it's the game that when I was a kid was, so they only make those in Japan, you know, or
Exactly.
even in you know, the beginning of my career, you know, no American developer making a JRPG style game. It was just out of the question. You know, and the, you know, the thing is that always bother, it's not economically viable, or nobody's going to buy that. You know, and I understand that games are a business, but I think there's something to be said, passion and putting out something you believe in, and maybe it's naive, but feeling like it'll find an audience. You know, it's a quality product that has a lot of heart behind it. There is an audience there for it. Hopefully, it's enough of an audience to put food on the table. You know,
I
there's
think
always that.
that's a recurring concern with Lab Zero. That I think most people that experience a Lab Zero product, that being Skullgirls at the moment, is pretty much the only way to get that. But people who play Skullgirls, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people that play Skullgirls, and my unique in between status is really giving me a lot of ability to talk to people on the team and people who play the game, and even people who don't really get into the competitive aspect or who aren't really into the art, they still say things that really just give you the impression that they understand this kind of underlying sense of heart,
Yeah.
of quality, that there's that somebody put a lot of effort and heart and energy and sweat and tears into this project, and
Oh, yeah.
that's it. People feel that. People do feel that. They don't even know that, and yet when they talk about it, you can hear it in their voice. They're like, "Man, I was really impressed this happened," and you're like, "You're right. That would have never
Oh,
been
yeah.
in another game."
Yeah. I mean, it's you know, I'm not the biggest fighting game fan. I mean, I like fighting games like Killer Instinct and Fighter, but you know, like you said, like I never got really into the competitive scene. But just knowing that, like, it's friggin' full on animated 2D, you know, like cartoon, and not even Capcom is doing that anymore. You know, like you look at the debacle behind Street Fighter Five, and it's like, here's this small scrappy team who's doing a full on quality fighting game that's balanced and, you know, full. Third Strike was back in the day. I think that says something for the passion behind doing doing the games that we grew up loving. There's an audience there that wants more of that, that wants more of that kind of old school mentality when it comes to gaming. And before it became this, you know, monolithic, you know, machine of industry, when games was just more about, you know, just making like weird that catered to, you know, the you know, was it the mainstream, you know,
Right.
and nothing against the Call of Duties, you know, they're my favorite, you know, whipping boy of the game industry. But you know, it's you know, like, and I'm not saying anything new here, but you know, risk averse because games are so expensive to make. And I think that the reason why you so many people have love for these older games is, so it was just like, we're going to make something crazy, and you know, there was no risk aversion because games didn't cost that much to get made, and the profit margin, and you can make a quirky little title that maybe only sold 100,000 copies, and that was enough. You know, now to break even, these
I know you
million.
hear stories about a game selling 4 million copies and lost money or something.
Right, right. And I think, you know, that's so. I think that's why Girls, you know, you look at it and you're like, wow, man, this game is quirky as hell, and it's unique, but it doesn't care. and make something that's true to our vision, and friggin' I don't know what or audience testing be damned. It's like, this is a quality fighting game and people will appreciate it, and obviously it's found an incredible audience.
Yeah.
Looking at stuff from the Japanese launch, and it's amazing.
I know, isn't that weird? Is that not like a Twilight Zone situation? An American fighter gets a relaunch in Japan.
I think it's sold out of Play Asia, from what I hear. And it's, I didn't work on the title obviously, but I still have an immense for my friends and coworkers at Lab Zero for what they put into it. I mean, obviously, I'm sure you feel the same way, having voiced Beowulf. And it makes me all the more excited and passionate about putting in my best effort into Visible.
No, I do know what you mean. There's something about because the thing is, when you work like a near union pay scale for voice acting, a union pay scale for voice acting is only $300 an hour for a 4-hour block, right? And so, I mean, the money's negligible. The money's nice. It's great to get paid for what you feel is like a talent you're bringing to something. But more than that, I think what I really got out of it was I got to feel the heat of a really intensely invested, intensely talented team of artists and individuals. It was more like, you don't want to say this, but you almost feel like I'd have done it for free. Because you get that sense, and you're like, man, this, not only is this game really good, but I have to do the absolute best, or it's like you can't do worse than your best, or you're fucking up.
I mean, I took a pay cut to come to Lab Zero because of how strongly I feel about it.
Yeah.
I felt like it was a once in a lifetime opportunity, and I couldn't have been happier with my decision.
Wow. That's pretty great. So you've been there for about 4 months now at the time of the recording, and you bounced around some pretty big studios and did some things, and you finally figured out where you want to be, and you're feeling pretty great now. Have you built any particular relationships? Is there anybody that's like you came in and you were high-fiving them on day 2 type situation, or because you already said Mike, there's a real kind of similarity of taste.
I mean, everyone at the studio is really, Richard is great. Alex, I was talking to him yesterday. We had a storm session where he was going over some of his ideas for some of the characters, and I was just completely blown away by the dude has like this unfiltered creativity where he's just able to like gush out like all these ideas, and they're just the craziest shit I've ever
I know what you mean. I remember feeling like that too. He just very prolific and very it kind of doesn't follow any line. He's like, yo, I had this idea, this idea, this idea, this idea. I was like, how did you have all those different ideas in this session? Like, you didn't follow any logical lines. You just made a bunch of cool shit that was not even remotely related to each other. Totally.
And then, we bounce back ideas like, what if this, what is that, so, but everyone there is amazing, and Earl and Brian and Mariel is fucking amazing. I love working with her. She's super talented, and I'm happy that she's perfect. And then we just hired a new producer, Franny. She's amazing. Like, holy crap, she's really awesome. And then, like I said, Willie, I work with him directly on the environments. He's great. Super chill, quiet dude, but man, what a monster in terms of it's I mean, the whole team is just incredible, and that's one of the things that I'm happiest about, is that there's a team that feels out of place. It's like everyone has their own quirks and personalities. Some people are quiet, some people are a little bit more outgoing. Everyone kind of fits in and kind of works together and moves the project along. It's and I love going to work every day. It's like I have yet to get the Sunday blues. It's like Sunday night tomorrow's work, and I'm like, oh man, tomorrow's work, awesome, like. So it's really great, and I don't delude myself perfect. There's always going to be ups and downs, and I'm sure there'll be some moments at Lab Zero where things get tough, and we're putting in some really long hours. It's the nature of game development, but I think that pill goes down a little bit easier when it's a project that you're passionate about and you're really, really the best that you can. And I think that's the case with Indivisible. So it's like, sure, we're going to work late hours on this project. There's no doubt about it. That's every project. It's kind of like you want to do it when it's this good of an idea, this good of a game, and even just playing the prototype, the basic version of the game, you can see it. There's something special there, and so I think people have played that. They need to remind themselves that it's only going to get better, which is because it's already pretty damn good. So I think that's an exciting thing, and it's funny. Like in the middle of a meeting, holy shit, I can't wait to play this fucking game. Excuse my language.
Right.
It's like
You're working on it and you're excited to play when it's done. Like that's quite rare.
exactly. Yeah, it really is. Usually by the time you're done with the game, you're just like, I don't want to look at it. But game I think I felt that way about was probably Donkey Kong. And yeah, so we have a long road ahead of us. And yeah, we've already seen like great progress, and I'm sure the backers of the project have been staying tuned to our Twitter accounts and the indie. So yeah, I think they're in for a pretty fun ride seeing the development of this type. I'm super stoked at how this interview we're having now, this conversation would never have been allowed at Retro. Like there's no way. Nintendo keeps a tight lid on things, and the fact that I was allowed to stream myself working on some of the environment a couple of weeks ago, like that was awesome. Like I love showing the process. I think it's I was saying that my mom's a teacher. I think it's in my blood, because it's showing people the process and answering questions about what I'm doing is like I love that, and being allowed by Peter and Mike at yeah, sure, man. Share the process. Let people know, like, this is how we make a video game. Like, that to me is like a really cool perk that a lot of game studios don't. I think indies are leading the way with that. Like Double Fine did the whole documentary along with Broken Age, and I think that was incredible. Like, watch that. They should watch it, because it's an incredible documentary that Two Player Productions put on for the development of that game, and it really shows you the that go into developing a game. So yeah, being able to kind of pull back the curtain on that even a little bit is really fun.
Okay, so 2 more questions. One, do you have any funny stories yet? I know it's only been 4 months. Is there anything that is uniquely Lab Zero that has happened and it made you laugh?
I mean,
because you kind of said when Mike said you're my kind of nerd, or the right kind of nerd.
Well,
that's almost something like that, but like.
Yeah, I mean, there's just like whiteboard shenanigans. Like, Mario drew Fighter 4 on the whiteboard the other day, and like made his hair. His hair looks like French fries, and it's like goofy stuff like that. You regularly have people bring in their dogs, so there's the other day I just started to lay down next to Franny's dog, spoon her for like 5 minutes, and so I'm spooning her dog on the floor. So goofy things like that.
That's what I was looking for. There we go. Midday spooning with dogs. That's great.
Yeah, I don't think we've gotten to the punch drunk kind of nature of like.
You're not on the crunch yet. You're not getting wacky.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll happen sooner or later.
Okay, and the very last one. Imagine there's a young artist out there, and they are where you were before you really kind of turned it back on. And they're thinking, I want to be able to do what he did. I want to be able to work in the industry. I want to eventually get somewhere where I'm happy and fulfilled. If you could give that person advice, what would you tell them?
I mean, I would say that it's not an it took me a long time to just figure out for myself what I wanted. It's trials and tribulations and figuring out what works for you. Like 5, 6 years ago, my goal was to have my name in lights and work on thing, like Uncharted 3, or like you know work at Bungie on Destiny or Halo, and it's like, but then and I don't care about that anymore. I don't care if nobody knows who I am, as long as I'm working on something I'm passionate about, and I get to kind of help shape that, what's important to me now. So it's an ongoing process of evolving what you need as an artist to fulfill your career. So I would say just be patient with yourself and be patient with the process, and accept the ups and downs, evolve with it. If you're unhappy where you are now, figure out what it is that you want, and understand also that no job is, there's certain things that, certain sacrifices that you have to make at any studio. LA is a great city, but I miss Austin. Great place too. I owned a house in Austin. I had, the cost of living was cheaper there, but I had to give that up to come to Lab Zero. So nothing is ever going to be perfect. Find your version of perfect, and kind of fit that into what you're looking for as an artist and as an individual. And just let the evolution of your life take place organically, and kind of run with it. Like I have, they love working at AAA, and they love like the challenge of figuring out how to make this character look more real, or make this environment more, so that you're playing a cover-based shooter and you're hiding behind a wall, but that wall can all of a sudden be destroyed by gunfire, and they want to figure out how to make that look good. Like, that's not what I'm looking for, but it's different for everyone, and you have to figure out like what it is that you as an artist want to express. Give on that. It's definitely something that's not going to come to you overnight, but I think if you are introspective and really give it a lot of thought and kind of figure out where steer your career, I think you can find where you fit in.
Awesome. Well, Eric Kozlowsky, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me. I think people will really get a lot out of it.
Yeah, it was my pleasure, Kai. Thank you for setting this up. I really had a lot of fun.